Amen. All right. I thought we'd take a quick look at the questions covering chapter 7 that we looked at last week. Lesson 11, starting with about question 9. It says, what prophecy did Elisha make regarding the famine? Or one or flour. Let's see. Measure of flour, 2 barley measures of barley for a shekel, like normal. And then what's specifically given regarding the Lord King lead? But, not eat it. That's exactly right. It said that it couldn't happen even if windows of heaven, they couldn't have that. He would see it and not eat it. The Syrian army troops of Samaria. Okay, the noise. Heard the noise of chariots. Army fled in the night. How was their departure discovered? Four lepers begging bread. They went to find no one there. It says, who was sent to invest the Syrians leaving? Okay, they sent chariots with their horses. Found all the Jordan on the way. It says, how was Elisha filled? All that food. All the spoils of the camp of Aaron was left behind, and they were able to take food into the city. It says, what happened to this prophecy? Trampled in the gate, telling people to be converse ran over. Let's see. Let's see. Why Shunem, Israel? Received God's prophet to. There was 7 years. Well, that answers the. Let's see. It says Gehazi in the king's court. Telling the guy, Elisha raised the widow dead, and then let's see before I answer the next question. And then the one walked in the room. And, why did the king restore the woman's land? Because the kind of goes together, doesn't it? Hey, nice. Providential circumstances of her showing up at that exact moment and asking for her land back, and just the king in a favorable frame of mind to help her. He restored her land. Question 20 says, why did Elisha go to Damascus? Sort of. The king Ben Hadad was ill, and that appears from the prophecy that was made to Elijah that he should tell to be the king, that this was the opportunity for that his servant Elisha, that he was there to anoint Hazael to be the next king. That's sort of, one of those type things, I guess you could say about that. It says, why did the Syrian king Ben-Hadad inquire of Elisha whether or not sickness? He tells him he would recover from his sickness, but he'd die anyway. But I kind of looked at that question as why would you go to a doctor find out about a sickness? Because you trust the doctor is going to know what he's doing. Why go to Elisha? He was a man of God and he was a prophet, and he would be somebody that could tell him. That he has such a reputation that he believed he'd get the right information. Let's see. And then the next question was about the message that he sent, that he would recover from sickness, but he would die. And Hazael didn't tell him the last part. He just told him he would recover. And then says, so why did Elisha weep over Hazael? He knew all of the suffering he was going to cause the people of Israel, and the death and all of the military consequences of what he was going to do. Let's see. How did Ben-Hadad die? Who did that? Hazael. Hazael smothered him. Right. He smothered him to death, his servant, and then he became king. Let's see. What was the nature? Okay, that brings us up to where we left off. We switched back to the kingdom of Judah and the kings that were alive at this time. And all of this will lead into the punishment that's going to come to the house of Ahab and Jezebel, and all of the sins that they've committed by introducing Baal worship and persecuting the prophets of God, and righteous people to death. All of those sins are going to come back down on the heads of their children and on their family, just as it has done on the dynasties before them. But all of this, God doesn't work on our timetable. He works on His. Now, all that's going to happen. But we see the consequences of the reign of these two contemporary kings of Israel and Judah, and what happens. We kind of introduced this last week at the very end of class. In the northern kingdom, you have Ahab that was the king, and then his son Ahaziah. We studied about that he fell through the lattice work, and he didn't last very long at all, and he died. He had the same spirit and attitude as his father. And Joram then becomes king of the northern kingdom. So he's the son of Ahab and Jezebel. And he's ruling there, and he is a wicked king. He's going to be the last of that line because Jehu, the general, is going to wipe out the whole family. That's going to be the judgment. And Elijah had that revealed to him. Remember, he would anoint Elisha the prophet, Hazael the Aramean ruler, and then Jehu, and the three of those together would defeat the Baal worshippers and bring judgment. And so we're going to see that unfold. In the southern kingdom, you have Jehoshaphat, and then his son Jehoram, and then following Jehoram, we'll look at Ahaziah. And Jehoram marries the daughter of Ahab, Athaliah, or Jezebel's daughter, and she's as wicked as her mother. And now not only is Israel being corrupted, but now the southern family is also introducing Baal worship, and they're just going down the same path. And if something wasn't done, the true religion of God might have got wiped out right there. But God intervenes in a dramatic way and kills everybody in that family, is wiped out. In both Judah and in Israel, they're going to be wiped out. Those that are related to Ahab and Jezebel. So it's going to take a toll on the kings down here. Jehoram, and Ahaziah is the one where the judgment falls on him. See, he just reigns for about a year. Little short line there. The next page shows the families just blown up this part. Remember there was, in the northern kingdom, you had Rehoboam in the south and Jeroboam in the north. And then Jeroboam's family introduced that false worship, and Baasha is the one that wiped that family out. And then Baasha's family didn't repent of that sin. And then Zimri, the general, destroyed Elah and that line, Baasha's family. And that dynasty ended. And then Zimri only lasted for about 7 days. And another general, Omri, he took over. And then from Omri, you have Ahab born, and he marries Jezebel and introduces that Baal worship. Then Ahaziah just lasts for a little bit. And then Jehoram, or Joram. Notice Jehoshaphat down here, you have Asa the good king, Jehoshaphat the good king, but Jehoshaphat makes peace with Ahab. And they intermarry between the two families, and it causes ruin because of him associating with that evil family in the north and compromising on those things. And you can see Jehoram, you have a little 5-year period where Jehoshaphat's gotten old and his son is reigning at the same time as him. And you have an overlap of rule. And then in 848, he becomes king on his own right. And is a very, very wicked king. He kills all of his brothers when he comes to power. They're all sons of David too, right? But he is ruling not like the sons of David. He is acting like Jezebel, right? In the way the pagan rulers rule in the other countries, where you get rid of all your rivals, even if they're in your own family, you get rid of them, right? So he is. You can see the spirit of Jezebel in that family. It says, now in the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, and then the king of Judah, son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, became king. Years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. This Tel Dan Stela or Steel, this has been found in the city of Dan, and it's a victory plaque that Hazael had drawn up. Now we're reading about Hazael, right? Aram's king. Well, he defeated these Jehoram in a battle, and Ahaziah, the sons of the descendants of Jehoshaphat. They went up and helped the king of Israel in battles against Aram, and Aram defeated them. And look what we found when the archaeologists dug this up. They find a list that mentions those two kings' names. And here on this part of the plaque, it says, of the house of David. And there were a lot of liberal scholars who were saying and teaching people in college that David's just a myth, and all of these kings are just myths, just stories handed down that never really happened. And then they found this. So every time that they dig, and people say, oh, the Bible's not true, these people never existed, they end up digging it up, and there's David's name and his house, and the exact order that we've been seeing in the book, in the Bible, is on this pagan monument that was found. So this is from another country. It's not from Bible people, and they say exactly the same thing. So we're not talking about just so stories. These are real people and real events And the house of David is not just some myth, it's a real thing. And there's concrete stone proof that it's so. It's been laying there covered in the dirt all those years, all those centuries. And now, just recently, it's been done. And he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, not like Jehoshaphat, not like Ahaz that walked in the ways of David. He walks like the king of Israel, Jehoram. Wicked man. He doesn't act like anybody that is faithful to Jehovah God, just as the house of Ahab had done. For the daughter of Ahab became his wife, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Wicked man. Well, sometimes you have the parallel with First and Second Kings are parallel with Second Chronicles. So you can go to Second Chronicles, and it gives many times more details about this is on the southern kingdom, the house of David. So you find out more information there. Now, when Jehoram had taken over the kingdom of his father and made himself secure, he killed all his brothers with the sword, and some of the rulers of Israel also. Moreover, it says in verse 11 there in chapter 21, he made high places in the mountains of Judah and caused the inhabitants of Jerusalem to play the harlot and led Judah astray. So he introduces idolatry into the land, just like Jezebel had done in the north. So now the kingdom of Judah is being corrupted by this idolatry. And it says in verse 19, then in 2 Kings, says, however, the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah for the sake of David his servant, since he had promised him to give him a lamp, or give a lamp to him through his sons always. So if God had just done what was deserved, if there was no grace involved, if God hadn't been thinking about David and all the promises he made to David and to all mankind, that through David, the Savior of the world was going to be born someday, he'd have just wiped out the whole family. That would have been the end. Wiped out Judah. These are wicked people that have violated the covenant and turned their back on God by worshiping idols. But God remembered his promise to David. And God keeps his word. And so he's going to be patient with the house of David. Jesus Christ hadn't been born yet. We can't get rid of the house of David yet. Judah still has a purpose. So, see how the grace of God plays in all of these things? Say, well, why did he put up with all that? Why didn't he wipe them out? Before the flood, he said he was sorry that he had made man. Why didn't he just wipe us all out? Well, he made a promise to Eve, right? So he had to preserve somebody. God keeps his word. He doesn't lie. And he's going to preserve some in Judah so that Jesus Christ can be born. It says, in his day, Edom revolted. Here's the punishment that came to the house of Judah. Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah and made a king over themselves. And Joram crossed over to Jair and all his chariots with him, and he came about that he arose by night and struck the Edomites who had surrounded him and the captains of the chariots. But his army fled to their tents. So Edom revolted against Judah to this day. So up to this time, David and his descendants have controlled the Edomites. They've been tributary to Judah, and they were a subject country. But because of their sin of idolatry, God lets them break away. So there is a punishment that comes. He came down here to the bottom of the Dead Sea, is where Zair is at, and he gets surrounded by the Edomites. But his chariots are able to fight their way out and get away. But they still lost. Right? The Germans tried to get away from Stalingrad, and they couldn't break out. But he was able to break out, but still, they're not in charge of the territory anymore. So God punished them for their idolatry. And the prophet shows you the consequences, how these blessings and advantages are taken away from a people when they don't honor God. And then that wasn't all. He also received a letter from Elijah. Now, we talked about Elijah back in chapter 2, and here we are in chapter 8. Remember when I told you everything's not in chronological order? When it was talking about all the miracles of Elisha and all of that? And also, you kind of follow one kingdom and then you shift back to the other kingdom. And we kind of are going backwards, seeing them back. Elijah was caught up in the chariot of fire to heaven back in chapter 2. But Jehoram was mentioned in chapter 1. So the very end of Elijah's life was probably, right at the very beginning of this king's reign in Judah. So about 848 is about when he began when we look at that chart. So that's probably about the year that Elisha was taken up, or Elijah was taken up. And before he died, this man had already killed his brothers. He'd already started doing these wicked things. And the prophet Elijah wrote him a letter. So we don't just have the book of 1 Kings, but within the book of 1 Kings, you have a letter that Elijah the prophet wrote. And it's only in 2 Chronicles 21. It's not in 1 or 2 Kings. It says, Then a letter came to him from Elijah the prophet, saying, Thus says the Lord God of your father David, because you have not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat your father, in the way of Asa your kings of Judah, but have walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and have caused Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to play the harlot, as the house of Ahab played the harlot. You have also killed your brothers, your own family, who were better than you. So the other brothers didn't marry Jezebel's daughter and follow the ways of the king of it. They were better men. Don't you think? I can see why he thought they were somebody to eliminate as a wicked man. He didn't want these men better than himself that served Jehovah accusing him when he started setting up these idols in the land. So he killed them. There wasn't going to be any opposition from the family. Somebody saying, "Oh, we should have him as king instead of this idolater." He tried to get rid of all of his competition. Behold, the Lord is going to strike your people, your sons, your wives, and all your possessions with a great calamity. And you will suffer severe sickness, a disease of your bowels, until your bowels come out because of the sickness day by day. There's a lot of ways the Lord can strike someone for their sins. Took away Edom. He's going to take away Libnah. And then he's going to cause the land to be invaded, and they're going to take away all the royal children and wives. And he's going to be struck with a sickness where his bowels are going to come out. He's going to be so sick. It's going to increase day by day. A lot like what happened to Herod, where he was eaten by worms and died. God does the same thing in the New Testament. So he hasn't changed, did he? He still does these same kind of things. So Libnah, this is a town that's over there it's in red there. Probably captured by the Philistines. And they're going to invade the land as well. He loses control of that city. Libnah revolted at the same time. And then again, 2 Chronicles 21, 16, and 17, then the Lord stirred up against Jehoram the spirit of the Philistines and the Arabs who bordered the Ethiopians. And they came against Judah and invaded it and carried away all the possessions found in the king's house, together with his sons and his wives, so that no son was left to him except Jehoahaz, the youngest of his sons. So they invade the land. Well, it doesn't pay to worship idols, does it? It doesn't pay to kill your brothers, because God sees everything that you do. And you're associated with God. You're supposed to be his king, ruling the land the way he wants it to be ruled. And he very swiftly deals with this man. It took 8 years his rule lasted altogether. Look at all the trouble that happened in those 8 years, because he chose to imitate the kings of Israel instead of David, his forefather, in being faithful to Jehovah. Does not pay. That's the reason that the prophet Jeremiah, or whoever the prophet is that authored this book, why he recorded these things the way he did about is Judah's history, Israel's history, so that we might all learn to be faithful to God and recognize there's consequences when you go against God's will. And it just doesn't pay to be disobedient. Jehoahaz is another name in Chronicles for Ahaziah. It's the same man. Ahaziah and Jehoahaz are the same. And just like in the New Testament, people have a couple of different names sometimes. Same way with some of these kings in the Old Testament. So it says, the rest of the acts of Joram and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So Joram slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. And Ahaziah, that's the only son he's got, is what we read in Chronicles. So Ahaziah, his son, became king in his place. And then again in 2 Chronicles, get a little more information from there. So after all of this, the Lord smote him in his bowels with an incurable sickness. Now it came about in the course of time, at the end of 2 years, that his bowels came out because of his sickness. And he died in great pain. And his people made no fire for him like the fire for his fathers. For he was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years, and he departed with no one's regret. And they buried him in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the king. So we're given a little more information in Chronicles. Horrible death, full of suffering for 2 years. Think about different forms of cancer and stuff that you get in your bowels today. Something like that happened to him, and there was no doctors, no radiation, no anything until it just ate him up. That's what happened. 40 years old when that happened to him. It says he was struck by God with that sickness. So there's a negative example for you. You don't want to go down that road. And things aren't going to go well for his son either, because his son has the same spirit as his father. He also is going to worship the idols. He didn't learn a thing from what happened to his father and the judgments that fell upon him. So the reign of Ahaziah says, in the 12th year of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, Ahaziah, the son of Joram, king of Judah, began to reign. So you see how you could get confused with Joram and Jehoram and Jehoram. They're got the same name in Israel and Judah, the king at this particular time. And that's just how it worked out, that they happen to have the same name. It says, and Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Athaliah, the granddaughter of Omri, king of Israel. And he walked in the ways of the house of Ahab and did evil in the sight of the Lord, like the house of Ahab had done, because he was a son-in-law of the house of Ahab. And he went with Joram, the son of Ahab, to war against Hazael, king of Aram, at Ramoth Gilead. And the Arameans wounded Joram. So King Joram returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds which the Arameans had inflicted on him at Ramah. And when he fought against Hazael, king of Aram. And Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to see Joram, the son of Ahab, in Jezreel, because he was sick. Now, you know why all of that's told? They're all in the same place. Pollution happens, and they're both going to get killed. That is the judgment of God. What would get the king of Judah and the king of Israel and everybody, they're all related now, right? They're all in-laws. And they both went off to fight in the battle. And the king of Israel got wounded. And he's getting some rehabilitation in Jezreel. What's important about that city? You remember what happened in Jezreel? You remember Naboth? That righteous man, and Ahab wanted his vineyard next door, and Jezebel said, I'll get the vineyard for you. Had him falsely accused and got the elders of the town to go along with it. And they had this total lack of justice that took kangaroo court. And Naboth got condemned, and his sons also were killed. and they took their property and gave it to the king. And Elijah the prophet met him when he went out, remember, to walk in the field and look over his new property that Jezebel got for him. And he said, they're going to lick up your blood right here. Right? That's where his son is going to die too. And they're going to lick up the blood of the whole family right there. That's where Jezebel is when she dies. And everything was said about Jezebel is going to happen. It's all, everybody's in the right spot at the right time, and God's going to strike them. Right? Remember, it didn't happen in Ahab's day. Remember what happened? Why it didn't happen to Ahab? Anybody remember that part of the story? He repented and he walked humbly before God, and God said, okay, I won't do it in your day. It got passed down now to Joram's day. That's when it's all going to fall. So God hadn't forgot about it. It just got pushed back. And now it's going to happen. You got a thought? Right. He punishes the sins of the father upon the children when the children do the same thing. That's what, it comes down on one generation's head a lot of times. You know, your grandpa was wicked, your father was wicked, and God was patient. And then you're wicked, and then the whole judgment falls on you. Right? That's the way it works in the physical kingdoms of the earth and families a lot of times. And that's what's going to happen here. It falls on this generation, gets the blunt of it, yes. So he was buried in the city of David, but he wasn't buried in the royal tomb. So he didn't get laid, in there. I guess you think about over in England, they have certain people get laid in St. Paul's Cathedral and heroes, and so he didn't get that. Yeah, he died and he was gathered to his fathers, but they're in Hades. Maybe that's what it's talking about. Maybe he went to judgment with his wicked fathers, I guess, but his body was not buried in the king's tomb. And so Jehoram, yes. Did you have a question or thought? Well, again, we're kind of have a staggered story. It was telling all about Elijah up until the end of chapter 1, and then he got taken up to heaven in chapter 2, right? But we're kind of moved the story back to where that left off. See, we were studying the northern kingdom, and now we've kind of come down, we've gone back to where we were, and we're coming forward again. So, right before he died, he wrote that letter. And then he died, and all this stuff happened after he was taken up to heaven. Let's see. So anyway, they go to battle, and they're wounded, and he goes to visit him, and then you hit the revolution of 841. Big year. It's when Jehu is anointed and becomes the king of Israel, and he's going to wipe out all of these Baal worshipers. He's going to wipe out the family of Ahab, both in Israel and Judah. He wipes them out. And God's judgment is carried out. There's not any descendant of Ahab's going to be left. Every single one of them's wiped out. And everybody that was his friend is wiped out. Now that part God didn't command. That's where Jehu goes too far. He, like anybody like remotely associated with him, he kills. So that wasn't what God said. But so in Amos, it says that Israel's going to be punished for the blood that Jehu sheds. He went beyond what God told him to do. But it just shows that God, there's, you might think, well, why is this wickedness allowed to go on and God's not doing anything? He's got a plan. And he knows how to deal with wicked people. And there's always somebody meaner or tougher someplace he can raise up to deal with somebody. And Jehu's the guy to do it. Yes. We just have to go back to the Tsar of Russia, right? When the Bolsheviks took over, they killed the whole family. Anastasia, the little girl, everybody got killed, right? What who you marry? Right. Yeah, there are many things in all of these stories that show you need to serve God and think for yourself and not go along with the crowd. Because, like I say, it might look like the politically wise thing to do was to follow Ahab and Jezebel, and they had all the power. Being a prophet or being a godly person, they were getting persecuted all the time. That's all going to come to a big screeching halt right here, right? Everything that looked like it was the way to go, not the way to go. Would have been a lot better to be on God's side when it's all said and done. It's the same thing in this life. When final tally comes on Judgment Day, you better be on God's side. They have to be raised to make a commitment for themselves. You can't be there their whole life. Everything that happens, you gotta grow up to make the right decisions. They need to have some practice exercising their free will, because someday they're gonna be on their own. They're gonna have to make the right choice. You can't just isolate them and they never make decisions. They gotta be able to stand on their own 2 feet. That's right. Right. In my immediate family, I'm the only one that's a Christian. So that's right. Just because that whole family's got a bad rep, there can be, you know, some gold there still. Because we all have an individual choice. But yeah, yeah. Right. Sometimes there's very dramatic action that's taken to save people too. Sometimes. Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we'll just have to take up with the revolution next time. I guess we have singing next week, right? Next next Wednesday, the week after next, we'll come back and take up with the revolution with Jehu. Appreciate your comments.